Supreme Court case on public employee unions. In 2018, it's not going to have that big an effect in Oregon politics simply because the public employee unions already have money in the bank. They're moving towards the people they want to support. They're doing all that kind of thing. It will play out after that in terms of what happens to the membership of those unions. Do they lose a substantial part of membership or not? There's been some research that has looked at this. It mainly comes from the unions themselves. For instance, the Oregon Education Association, it doesn't look like it would lose that many members, but it's not clear if groups like the SEIU, for instance, would. Nobody's really looked at it and figured that out. This is an issue that affects not only Oregon, but affects, last I saw was 19 states across the country. I would expect there to be a national decision made by these unions about what they might do. Will they, for instance, raise dues to kind of make up the difference in money that would be lost from having lower membership? Will they push for certain separations of the workers into different groups? Will they change their political focus? It's not just an Oregon issue, it has much larger implications.
If I recall correctly, this achieved something that Bill Sizemore had tried to achieve through a ballot measure.
Yeah, no, people of Oregon have voted on this at least once and they said no. There have been other efforts for it to get on the ballot that have failed. So for me looking at it, that means the people of Oregon have said no several times. But here the Supreme Court has said, no, that's wrong. People who are in these workplaces should not be obligated to pay union dues if they don't want to be part of the union.
Does this mean the power of public sector unions in politics in Oregon will be diminished? Or do we have to wait and see?
We have to wait and see. Remember, the power of public union politics in Oregon is really something that kind of dates from the early to mid 1980s. So it's kind of 30-ish years old. Before that, you saw a little bit of it, but it wasn't the same thing. And it's also public employee unions. Back before the 1980s, especially that big recession we had in 1982, the biggest unions were the private unions. It was especially the timber industry and places like that. So we've seen this reality that's been going on, and it's nationwide. Unions are basically public employee unions now. The private unions for the auto workers and things like that just aren't as powerful as they once were. So what happens with that? The Democratic Party has in effect constructed a place for these unions because the opposite side is the business groups who tend to fund Republicans. And the business groups nationally may be more or less organized. In Oregon, they're certainly less organized. But they're going to be there this whole time, and business groups have far outraised union groups over the past 35 years. So does it change the power dynamic? It could, but I'm more interested in looking at whether or not it changes the Democratic Party framework and how it is put together. Remember in Oregon, especially when we had in the 1990s, we had term limits. We also had limits on campaign contributions. And during the campaign contribution limits, a fascinating thing happened. Outside groups would adopt candidates and spend more than the candidates could raise, and the candidates couldn't do anything about it. The unions in Oregon have sometimes played that role, that third role. So will they still be able to do that? We'll have to wait and see. I would suspect that they'll lose a little bit of power, but it might not be that noticeable because, once again, the business side in Oregon is not really unified in a strong way. And so it may just be a wash for us.